At sunrise, wrapped in cold fog, little Maddie stepped onto her driveway, only to freeze as 14 police dogs emerged from nowhere and circled her in complete silence. They didn't bark or attack. They stood between her and the porch, guarding her from something no human could see. And when the scarred K-9 growled toward the darkness under the steps, everyone finally realized the real danger wasn't coming from outside. It had been hiding under her house all along. Oh, Doi Jai, La Chapter 1, Viet Jung, Yiu Kao, Tuan Bonoi Dung Truyen, Bang Tieng An, Banjia Mai. Chapter 1, The Circle on the Driveway. Morning came slowly to Clearwater Bay, dragging a pale gray light across the quiet cul-de-sac. Fog rolled in from the ocean, slipping between the tall fir trees and curling around the small wooden houses like breath held too long. The Harper place sat at the very end, its narrow driveway sloping toward the street, still glistening from the night's mist. Inside, the old heater hummed and clicked, struggling to keep up. Emily Harper wrestled with a stubborn ponytail in the bathroom mirror, dark circles under her eyes from the graveyard shift at St. Mary's Hospital. Behind her, the digital clock on the counter blinked 7:01 a.m. in relentless red. "Maddie, bus in 10, she called, voice rough with sleep and worry. Down the short hallway, Maddie Harper zipped up a faded purple hoodie and dragged her backpack off the chair. At 8 years old, she moved like someone trying not to disturb the air itself, careful footsteps, soft breaths. She paused at her bedroom door, listening. The house was quiet, but not the comforting kind. The boards under her feet felt as if they were waiting. She pushed the feeling away, the way adults kept telling her to, and hurried to the front door. The cold hit her first when she opened it, a sharp bite straight through her socks. She stepped onto the small porch, then down to the driveway, where the world narrowed to wet asphalt, a crooked mailbox, and the faint rumble of a school bus far off in town. The fog was thicker outside than it had looked through the window. It swallowed the ends of the street, turned the neighboring houses into gray ghosts. Maddie pulled her hoodie tighter and wiped her palms on her jeans. Somewhere in that heavy silence, a single gull cried over the bay. Then nothing. No cars. No voices. No wind between the trees. She stopped halfway down the driveway and set her backpack beside her shoe. Her breath hung in the air in small white puffs. For a moment, everything felt normal. Just another morning. Just another bus coming. Just another day. Then she heard it. Not loud, not close. Just a muffled thump on wet pavement, like a heavy paw landing where it shouldn't be. Maddie turned her head toward the sound. At the far end of the street, where the fog pressed closest, a shape moved. Big, low, deliberate. Then another shape stepped out beside. It. Broad shoulders, pointed ears. The shine of something strapped across a chest. A third figure joined them, then a fourth, and Maddie's chest tightened as the shapes kept coming. They emerged from different directions, out of mist and shadow, as if peeled from the air. From between two parked cars, from the tree line behind Mr. Cole Benson's yard, from the walking trail that cut down toward the beach. One by one, German shepherds padded into view, their dark coats wet with fog, black K-9 vests hugging their ribs like armor. Each dog wore a metal badge that caught what little light the morning offered. Their breath steamed around their muzzles as they moved, but they did not pant, did not bark. Their eyes were locked forward, tracking one point at the center of the cul-de-sac, the narrow strip of asphalt where Maddie stood alone on her driveway. She felt the weight of their gaze before she could count them. Her feet wanted to move, but her body forgot how. The first dog reached the mouth of the driveway and turned sideways, placing himself between her and the street. The second took a spot opposite him. Then a third slid behind her, paws whispering on damp concrete. In seconds, more dogs filled the gaps, moving in a slow, perfect pattern that no person had called out. The circle closed so smoothly it felt rehearsed. 14 K-9s, shoulder to shoulder, formed a ring around the small girl and her abandoned backpack. Their tails hung still, not tucked in fear, not raised in challenge. Their ears were forward, their bodies rigid but not trembling. Only their noses moved, twitching as they tasted the air for something only they seemed to know was there. From inside the house, a mug clinked in the sink. Emily glanced toward the window, half thinking she'd heard something outside, but the view was nothing but her own faint reflection and a wall of gray. In the backyard, a neighbor's wind chime gave a single, lonely note, then went silent again. On the street, time thinned to a single sound, Maddie's uneven breathing. She finally found her voice, or what was left of it. Hey, she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was talking to. None of the dogs looked directly at her face. Their bodies formed a perfect shield around her, noses pointed not outward toward the street, but slightly inward, angled toward the front of the house, toward the low wooden porch just a few feet behind her. One of them drew her attention more than the rest. A large male, his coat darker, a pale scar running across the bridge of his muzzle like an old crack in stone. He stood closest to the porch steps, front paws planted wide, chest lifted. His eyes flicked from the front door to the shadow beneath the porch boards, then back again, burning with a focus that made Maddie's skin prickle. She followed his gaze without meaning to. The porch looked ordinary at first glance: peeling paint, a loose board on the third step, the dented metal boot tray by the door. But beneath it, where the slats didn't quite meet the lattice, there was a slice of darkness too solid for this hour of morning. As she stared, trying to make sense of it, something under there shifted with a soft wooden sigh. It was barely a sound, just the smallest creak from the guts of the house, the kind you could blame on old nails or damp beams. But the effect on the dogs was instant. 14 heads snapped toward the porch in the same heartbeat, ears sharpening, muscles tightening as if someone had pulled a string through all of them at once. The scarred dog's lips curled just enough to show the line of his teeth. Maddie's heart kicked against her ribs. The fog, the driveway, even the distant bus all fell away. There was only the ring of K-9s, the hollow space beneath her own porch, and the cold, steady knowledge creeping up her spine that whatever these dogs had come for was not out in the street. It was here, at her house, somewhere very close, somewhere directly behind her feet. The first person who saw more than fog and shadows was Mrs. Keegan across the street. She stepped out in her robe to grab the paper, then froze on her front step, the rolled newspaper slipping from her fingers. 14 police dogs in full K-9 gear stood locked around Maddie Harper's driveway like a living barricade. For a long beat, she could only whisper, "Dear Lord." Her shout carried farther than she meant it to. Doors opened up and down the cul-de-sac, slippers scuffed on porches, screen doors squeaked. A few phones came up out of habit, not yet understanding what they were filming. From every angle, the same impossible sight appeared on their screens. A tiny girl in a purple hoodie, and a ring of German shepherds standing guard with military stillness. In the middle of it all, the dogs did not move, unless Maddie did. When she shifted her weight, they adjusted by inches. When she swallowed, ears twitched. Their bodies formed a tight, even circle, tails low, chests lifted. No snapping, no lunging, just a tension in their shoulders that said they were ready, not to attack, but to absorb whatever might come. At the edge of his yard, Cole Benson hesitated with a coffee mug halfway to his lips. He had been a K-9 technician long enough to know the sound of working dogs on duty, the rhythm of their breathing when they were keyed up. But these dogs made almost no noise at all. The silence around them felt wrong, like someone had muted the world and left only their eyes turned up to full volume. Cole walked closer, joints complaining in the cold, the limp in his left leg more noticeable when he rushed. As he reached the fence, he saw the black nylon vests more clearly, the faded lettering near the shoulders, the small metal tags clipped near each collar. His breath caught. Those tags weren't new. Some were scratched nearly smooth from years of use, from jobs that should have ended long ago. He set his mug on a fence post and leaned in, squinting at one dog near the front, a scar across the muzzle, a tag with a number he hadn't seen in almost a decade, R-17-1, Ranger. Cole's hand trembled. Unit numbers surfaced from a part of his memory he thought he'd put away for good. Unit 17, a team that had been retired, then lost in transition, as the paperwork politely called it. "Emily," he called softly, not wanting to startle the dogs. "You need to stay on that porch." Emily was already gripping the railing, white-knuckled, eyes wide on her niece. "They're going to hurt her," she breathed. But Cole shook his head. He watched the way Ranger stood, front paws anchored between Maddie and the porch, eyes flicking back to the darkness under the boards. "If they meant to hurt her," he said quietly, "they'd have done it already." Down on the street, Toby Reed's drone buzzed faintly overhead, its camera hovering above the scene like a curious bird. The dogs barely acknowledged it. Only one, a female with a pale patch on her chest, glanced up for half a second, then dismissed it as unimportant. Their attention kept drifting back to the same two things: the girl in the center and the shadowed space under the porch. Neighbors began talking all at once, fear turning every thought into a worst-case scenario. Someone suggested animal control. Someone else swore they'd heard about a prison transport accident on the radio, as if these dogs might have escaped from there. Cole ignored the noise. Instead, he watched the synchronization, the way 3 dogs stepped forward in unison each time a person came within 10 feet of the driveway. "Don't go down there," he warned when Mr. Peterson from 2 doors over started toward Maddie with his hands raised. "I'm just going to grab her," Peterson said, taking another step. The response was instant. 3 K-9s, including Ranger, surged forward as one, paws digging into the wet driveway, teeth bared just enough to show they were done being polite. They stopped inches short of Peterson's legs, a warning line drawn in fur and muscle. Peterson stumbled back, hands up, heart pounding. The dogs did not chase him. They simply reformed the circle, closing the gap with a precision that stole the argument right out of his mouth. Their message was simple and impossible to ignore. No one crosses this line. Not neighbor, not family, not even good intentions. On the porch, Emily turned toward her niece, trying to catch her eyes past all that fur and nylon. "Maddie, sweetie, it's okay," she called, voice shaking. "They're going to move. The police will come. Just stay still." Maddie wanted to believe that. But from where she stood, she could see the way Ranger kept glancing at the porch, not the street, the way his nostrils flared, as if picking up a scent buried in wood and soil. Without meaning to, she whispered, "You smell it too, don't you?" The words were for no one, but 14 pairs of ears flicked. Ha! At once. The dogs stiffened. Emily heard only the tremor in Maddie's voice. Cole heard the words themselves and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Smell what?" he asked carefully, eyes never leaving Ranger. Maddie swallowed hard, tears burning the backs of her eyes. She had promised herself she wouldn't say anything again, not after the last time the adults traded those worried looks over her head. But the dogs were here now. They were standing exactly where she had always felt it, on the boards that creaked at night above the breaths no one else seemed to hear. "The man," she whispered, "the one under the house. I told you, and nobody believed me." For a heartbeat, the whole cul-de-sac seemed to stop. The fog hung heavier. The drone hummed on, recording every second. Emily felt the ground tilt beneath her. "Maddie, there is no man under the house," she said, more out of habit than conviction. But Cole watched Ranger, Watched the way his hackles rose just slightly at the word man, watched how 3 other dogs shifted their weight toward the porch lattice. Ranger turned his head then, just enough to look at Cole. For a strange, quiet moment, it felt like recognition passed between them. Old technician, old K-9, 2 veterans meeting again in a place neither expected. Ranger's gaze slid past him to the narrow crawl space opening beneath the steps, then back to Matty. His body didn't move much, but everything about him said the same thing. The girl is not the problem. The house is. Sirens hadn't arrived yet. No blue lights cut through the morning. It was just a dead-end street, a ring of frightened neighbors, 1 shaking child, and a silent K-9 unit that refused to back down. As the fog thickened and the cold dug deeper into everyone's bones, Cole straightened slowly and made a quiet decision. Until someone proved otherwise, he was going to trust the dogs more than the fear in the humans' voices. He stepped back from the fence, raising his hands a little so the K-9s could see them, a habit from years of working around keyed-up animals. "All right, boys," he murmured, voice low, respectful. "You want us away from that porch? We'll stay away. But if you've come all this way to stand on our street, then whatever you're here for, it's already under our feet." The sirens reached them before the lights did, a faint rising wail that slipped through the trees and over the fog like a warning carried on the wind. The sound pulled every head toward the mouth of the cul-de-sac. Only the dogs didn't turn. 14 K-9s held their circle around Matty, eyes still fixed on the Harper house and the dark seam beneath the porch. 2 patrol SUVs nosed into the street, tires crunching on damp gravel, red and blue lights washing the fog in restless color. The neighbors stepped back on instinct, creating a crooked path toward the driveway. Doors opened. Sergeant Daniel Morales climbed out. Of the lead car, the weight of too many strange calls already stitched into his shoulders. On the passenger side, Officer Jenna Lee slid from her seat, scanning the scene with the quick, measuring look of someone who had stood behind many K-9s and trusted them with her life. Her gaze caught on the ring of dogs, then narrowed slightly. No handlers, no leashes, no vehicles marked as K-9 units. 14 working dogs, operating as one, where no deployment had been ordered. Morales took 3 steps forward, then stopped when Ranger's head turned toward him. It was a small movement, but it carried the same weight as a raised hand. The sergeant had seen aggressive dogs, panicked dogs, confused dogs. This was none of those. These animals stood like soldiers already in formation, and Morales felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. Behind them, a white animal control van rolled to a stop. Carla Briggs climbed out, tugging her jacket tight, her hand resting on the latch of a tranquilizer rifle case. She took one look at Matty inside the circle and shook her head. "You've got a child boxed in by 14 trained biters," she said flatly. "We need to drop them before this goes bad." Jenna didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved dog to dog, reading posture, tail, ear set. "They're not keyed on her," she murmured. "Look at their line. They're keyed on something behind her." Carla snorted. "Tell that to the parents when one of them snaps." But Jenna had already stepped forward, palms open, voice low and calm. "Easy, boys. Easy, girls. It's all right." She let her gaze settle on the scarred male by the porch steps. "You've done this before, haven't you?" she said quietly. "You know what a perimeter is." Ranger's ears flicked at the sound of her voice, but his paws stayed planted. The dogs watched her the way they had watched everyone else, alert, assessing, but not impressed. When she was 6 feet from the circle, 3 dogs moved forward in a smooth line. Their advance was not a rush, not a lunge. They simply stepped into the space, shoulders touching, forming a wall of fur and vest that said, as clearly as words, "This far, no farther." Jenna stopped, boots damp on the driveway. "K-9, stand down," she called, crisp now, the old command tone slipping back into her voice. The response was the same. 14 dogs blinked. None obeyed. Morales tried next, louder, using the full call-outs he'd heard on training ranges. K-9 units, sit, heel, stand down. The words rolled over the circle like distant thunder over a field of stone. One young dog blinked and shifted his weight, then settled again, angling his body back toward the porch lattice. Carla shook her head, jaw tight. They're not responding. This is exactly how a mauling call starts. On the porch, Emily flinched at that word. Cole stepped closer to Morales, keeping his voice low. "Those aren't random dogs," he said. "Check. They're tags. That's Guard 1. That's Ranger. Unit 17. Morales glanced at him, frowning. The name meant nothing yet. But when he looked closer and saw the worn stamped metal on each collar, the doubt in his stomach hardened into something heavier. Jenna's radio crackled with distant voices asking for updates. She ignored it for a moment, focusing instead on the pattern of breaths in the circle. Working dogs breathing this hard usually panted, tongues out. These dogs kept their mouths closed, breaths deep and measured, as if holding themselves in check. Whatever line they'd drawn in their heads, they were determined not to cross it first. "Where are their handlers?" Morales finally asked, more to the morning itself than to anyone in particular. No one could answer. Toby's drone hovered above, its camera catching the tight ring, the thin girl, the anxious aunt. Ranger's nose lifted slightly, tasting the air. He scented fear on the humans, old salt from the bay, damp wood from the porch, and something else, sharp and wrong, seeping up from below. Jenna backed up a step, hands still open. "All right," she said softly, more for the dogs than for the crowd. "We hear you. You don't want anyone near that porch." She turned to Emily. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay right where you are, okay? If they're guarding, you pushing past them is the one thing that could make this explode." Emily bit her lip but nodded, eyes never leaving Maddie. Inside the house, the front room sat in dim, slightly crooked peace. Old couch, framed school pictures, and on a shelf near the TV, a row of photos in mismatched frames. While Morales kept the neighbors at bay and Carla paced by her van, Jenna stepped inside for a moment, looking for any clue that might explain why 14 retired ghosts of a K-9 unit had shown up on this one driveway. Her eyes landed on a photograph halfway down the shelf. A younger Emily, laughing, a tall man in a dark uniform beside her, and in front of them, crouched at his knee, the same scarred German shepherd now standing guard on the porch. The name on the man's badge caught the light. Harper. Jenna felt the pieces shift, not into place yet, but toward each other. Outside, Ranger's ears twitched, as if he knew his past had just stepped back into the room. Fog still clung to the yards like a blanket that refused to lift. The rush that came with sirens and flashing lights began to drain away, leaving something quieter but heavier in its place. The K-9 circle held firm on the driveway, 14 bodies forming a rough ring of tan and black against the wet concrete. Ranger stood at the point closest to the porch, chest rising slow and steady. Morales stepped back from the curb, radio clipped to his shoulder, crackling with half-heard questions from dispatch. He ignored them for the moment. There was no box on his screen for retired K-9 unit appears without orders. He glanced again at the E. Porch, then at the circle of dogs, trying to understand the story they were telling with their bodies instead of with words. Jenna came out of the house holding the framed photo she'd found. She didn't wave it around. She just stepped closer to Emily and turned it so the woman could see. "This is your sister's husband, right?" she asked gently. Emily nodded, throat tight. "Ryan. He worked K-9 before the accident." Jenna's eyes flicked from the picture of Ranger to the living version 10 feet away. The scar on Ranger's muzzle was smaller in the photo, still pink at the edges, but it was the same dog. The way he sat, weight slightly forward, one ear nicked. There are some dogs you don't forget. Jenna felt a prickle along her arms. Whatever had brought Unit 17 here, it wasn't random. These weren't strays who followed a scent of bacon. They had chosen this driveway. Out in the circle, Maddie shifted her feet, trying not to cry. The dogs adjusted with her, leaving just enough room for her sneakers to move without breaking their line. When she glanced at Ranger, his gaze met hers for a moment. It wasn't soft exactly, but it wasn't mean either. It was the look of something measuring distance, counting breaths, listening for a cue she couldn't hear. Morales finally knelt at the edge of the driveway, lowering himself to the dog's level. "All right," he said quietly, as if talking to a row of officers. "You've made your point. You don't want anyone near that porch. But I've got a scared kid in the middle of your formation, and I need to know why." His eyes moved to Maddie. "Honey, when you said man under the house, what did you mean?" For a moment she stared at him, then at Emily, then down at her shoes. The words came out thin but clear. "I hear him at night, under my floor and under there." She flicked a glance at the shadows beneath the porch boards. "He drags things. He breathes. Sometimes he laughs when the lights go off." On the word laughs, 3 of the K-9s closest to the porch stiffened. The reaction was small but sharp. Ranger's ears tipped forward, then pinned back, every muscle under his vest drawing tight. Another dog beside him let out a low, rolling rumble that stayed in his chest, not yet a growl, but close. They understood fear. They understood danger. They understood the way a child's voice changed when it carried a memory she didn't want to have. Up above, the drone dipped lower, its camera tilting down toward the dark space beneath the porch. The tiny hum of its rotors finally drew a real reaction. A young male on the far side of the circle snapped his head up, eyes following the robot insect's path. But after one quick check, he lowered his gaze again, as if deciding it posed no threat compared to whatever they scented in the wood and dirt. "Let me get an angle underneath," Toby called from the sidewalk, already staring at his phone screen. "The lattice is busted on one side. I can get the drone in closer." Carla muttered something about kids and gadgets, but Morales raised a hand. "Do it," he said. "Nobody steps onto that porch until we see what we can see from out here." The only ones on the wood would be plastic and metal. The drone eased toward the side of the steps, where the lattice hung crooked and broken. Ranger followed its path with his nose, not his eyes, tracking the air it stirred. As the camera slipped into the gap, the dog's body lowered a fraction, weight shifting toward his front paws. The other K-9s leaned with him like a tide pulled by the same unseen moon. On Toby's screen, gray shapes resolved slowly. Joists, dirt, stray leaves blown under in some past storm. Then, further back, something that did not belong. A boxy shape strapped to the underside of the floor with zip ties, a tiny red light glowing near its edge. There's something wired up down there," he said, voice suddenly dry. "Like a camera or a router or... I don't know." As if it heard him, the red light blinked twice, then went dark. At that same instant, every dog in the circle jerked, heads snapping toward the porch. Ranger's lips peeled back over his teeth, and this time the sound in his throat rose into a full, warning growl. 3 others joined him, the low chorus thrumming through the boards like distant thunder under Emily's bare feet. Carla took a step forward, rifle case swinging. "All right, I'm done waiting," she snapped. "We trank the lot of them, pull the girl out, and rip that porch apart." But before she could take a second step, Ranger lunged to the very edge of the concrete, claws scraping, eyes locked on her hands. He did not cross the invisible line he'd drawn, but his message was as sharp as teeth. Morales's hand shot out, stopping Carla cold. "Don't," he said. "He's not guarding himself. He's guarding her and whatever's under there. You fire one dart, and every dog here has to decide who they're protecting." He looked back at the porch, then at the darkness beneath. "We're going to do this their way for now. We stay off that wood until we're ready, and when we step on it, we assume we're not alone." The wind shifted slightly, bringing a stray breath of salt from the bay. For a few seconds, the dogs' hackles smoothed, their growls faded, but their bodies stayed tight, eyes trained on the same black seam. On the porch, Emily slid down until she was sitting on the top step, one hand pressed over her mouth, the other gripping the railing. In the ring below, 14 K-9s waited, silent sentries between a little girl and something that had been listening to her house for far too long. The decision to touch the porch came slowly, like a tide that had been threatening all morning, and finally reached the steps. The panic of the first sirens had faded into a quieter kind of fear, the kind that asked hard questions and didn't like the answers. The circle of K-9s remained on the driveway, but their eyes told everyone the real trouble was a few feet higher. Ranger stood at the front, as he had from the start, weight set forward, tail low but steady. The porch boards creaked whenever Emily shifted above him, yet his gaze never blamed her. He watched the dark gap beneath the steps, the place where the lattice hung broken, the place the drone had slipped through. The scent that rose from there was old, human, and wrong. Morales walked up to the edge of the driveway with a crowbar in his hand, moving carefully, not because of the tool, but because of the dog watching him use it. "We're going to take a look underneath," he said, voice soft, more out of respect for the K-9s than for the crowd. Ranger's ears flicked, but he did not step back. He simply shifted, guarding the line where wood met concrete. Jenna circled wide, coming up on the far side of the steps, where the lattice sagged toward the flower bed. Two other dogs moved with her, not touching her, but keeping pace, as if they had been assigned to escort duty. When she knelt and slid the crowbar into the soft, splintered wood, all three lowered their heads and sniffed at the gap, reading a story she could not see. The first board gave way with a groan, the sound of long nails finally losing their grip. Dust and cold air puffed out, carrying with it the smell of damp soil, stale sweat, and something metallic. Ranger's nose wrinkled. He stepped closer, head low, shoulders bunched. Behind him, the rest of Unit 17 tightened the ring around Maddie, tails straightening like flags in a strong wind. Jenna eased the loose board aside and aimed a flashlight into the darkness. The beam slid over joists and cobwebs, then stopped on a rectangular shape, bolted up against the underside of the floor. Wires snaked from it along the beam, a small antenna blinking with a dying green pulse. "Router, maybe? Or a hub?" she murmured. This didn't come with the house. Next to the device, half hidden in shadow, something else glinted. She shifted the beam. A small camera, its lens pointed through a drilled hole in the porch trim, aimed straight at the front door. Beneath it lay a tangle of zip ties, a spare battery pack, and a little notebook sealed in plastic. Ranger rumbled low, the sound traveling through the wood like a warning to whatever might still be listening. On the driveway, Toby swallowed as he watched the image from his drone match what Jenna's light revealed. "It's wired to something," he said, voice shaky. "That cable goes back, deeper. It doesn't just stop under there." The dogs seemed to agree. 3 of them began to paw at the dirt near the foundation, claws scratching a shallow trench along a narrow, buried line. Morales took the notebook when Jenna slid it out with the crowbar, but Ranger's attention had already moved past the gadgets. The scarred K-9 backed away from the gap and turned his head toward the front door itself. He inhaled deeply, then walked to the center of the porch, stopping over a particular patch of floor where the boards met with a subtle ridge. Inside the living room, The same ridge ran across the old hardwood, almost invisible under the edge of a thin rug. When Morales stepped in to follow Ranger's path with his eyes, the floor answered with a dull, hollow knock under his boot. Not the solid thud of a proper foundation, a shallow echo. Ranger's ears snapped toward the sound, and he stared straight down, as if the wood were transparent. One by one, 4 other K-9s broke from the driveway ring with reluctant precision, leaving 10 to hold formation around Maddie, while they joined Ranger inside. They spread out along the uneven floor, paws tapping, noses pressed close to the boards. Each time they crossed that same faint ridge, their breathing deepened, their tails stiffened. The house itself felt like it was trying to keep a secret. "Trapdoor," Cole said quietly from the doorway, remembering basements in old farmhouses and storm shelters in rough neighborhoods. Morales nudged the rug back with the crowbar, exposing the boards beneath. 2 were newer, their grain lighter, the nails shinier. Ranger stepped to the edge of those boards and stood there as if he had been waiting years for someone to notice. The metal bar slid between the planks with a dry screech. Ranger did not flinch. He held his position inches away, eyes fixed on the line where light would meet whatever lay below. As Morales leaned his weight onto the crowbar, the board lifted a fraction and a breath of cold air washed out, carrying the same scent that had clung under the porch. Only stronger, closer, like a man's whisper against bare wood. For a heartbeat, everything went still. The officers, the neighbors, even the fog seemed to pause. On the driveway, Maddie felt a shiver run up her legs, through the soles of her shoes, before she ever heard the faint scrape of hinges hidden under the floor. Ranger's hackles rose in a slow, deliberate wave. He had followed the trail from under the porch to the heart of the house, and now, with his nose over the narrow gap, he knew. Whatever they were looking for hadn't come, and gone. It was down there, and it had been there for a very long time. The hatch opened with a tired, reluctant sigh, as if the house itself had been holding its breath for years. Cool air rose from the dark space below, smelling of old dirt, rust, and something far more human. Ranger stood at the edge of the opening, claws gripping the floorboards, head lowered, ears tipped forward into the black. Morales clipped a small flashlight to his vest and glanced at Jenna. "I'm going down," he said quietly. "You're with me. We'll take 4 of them." He nodded toward Ranger and 3 others who had already stepped closer, as if they had heard their names before they were spoken. The rest of Unit 17 stayed where they were, holding their line around Maddie and the porch. The first rung of the metal ladder groaned under Morales's weight. Dust shook loose and drifted down into the crawl space like ash. He descended slowly, feeling with his boots before trusting each step. Ranger did not wait to be invited. As soon as there was room, he slipped past the sergeant's leg, landing on the packed earth with the grace of an animal that had worked in tight spaces before. Jenna followed, one hand on the ladder, the other on the flashlight, the beam cutting a narrow tunnel through the gloom. The crawl space ceiling sat only a few feet above Morales's shoulders, forcing him to stoop. Ranger moved ahead, low to the ground, nose sweeping back and forth, tail straight as a rod. 2 more K-9s dropped in behind them, paws landing soft but sure. As Jenna's light adjusted, the shapes around them came into focus. Not just beams and pipes, but a life carved out beneath someone else's. A thin mattress pushed against the foundation wall. Crates turned into shelves. A lantern, cans stacked in neat, obsessive rows. This wasn't a place someone had passed through. It was a place someone had stayed. Ranger padded toward the mattress, sniffing at the rumpled blanket. The fur along his spine rose higher with every breath. There was no confusion in him, no curiosity. He knew the difference between old scent and fresh. This was not the ghost of someone who had left. This was the lingering warmth of someone who still thought this space belonged to him. On a low crate, beside a chipped mug, lay a spiral notebook with its first half swollen and stained. Jenna picked it up with 2 fingers. The cover peeled back to pages full of jagged handwriting. Day 403, she read softly. She sits on the porch steps longer now. Day 412, dogs always return to the strongest handler. Her voice thinned. Day 427, the house remembers us. Ranger's head snapped away from the mattress toward a far corner where the darkness seemed to fold in on itself. He took 3 slow steps, shoulders rolling under his vest, then froze, staring at a patch of cinder block and earth that looked no different from the rest. A low growl slid out of his chest, deeper than before, carrying weight like a warning shot. Morales followed the dog's line of sight. At first he saw nothing but shadow. Then, as Jenna's beam drifted that way, something shifted in the black, the faint scrape of fabric against stone. A breath pulled in too fast and held too long. Ranger moved no farther, but his growl sharpened, echoing off the beams overhead and straight into the lungs of whoever was hiding there. "Come out," Morales called, voice calm but firm. "Slow and with your hands where I can see them." The silence that followed was thin and mean. Then a shape peeled itself from the corner, a man, thinner than he should have been, clothes streaked with dirt, hair matted. He squinted against the light like a creature that had forgotten the sun, but his eyes were sharp. He raised his hands, but there was nothing surrendering in the way he moved. His gaze dropped first to Ranger, then slid up, past Morales and Jenna, as if measuring how much of the world the dogs now owned. Ranger didn't bark. He simply held that man's scent and stared together in his mind, remembering. This was not a stranger. This was a trail that had started a very long time ago. "On your knees," Morales ordered. "Now." The man hesitated until one of the other K-9s stepped up at Ranger's flank, lips lifting just enough to show white. That did what the human voices could not. The man slowly folded down, knees pressing into the cold dirt, fingers flexing once before going still. Jenna moved in, cuffs ready, heart pounding in a slow, heavy rhythm. As the metal closed around his wrists, the man smiled, a thin, cracked line that never reached his eyes. "Took you long enough," he rasped, looking past the officers to Ranger. "You always did like playing hero, didn't you, boy?" Ranger's ears flattened for a heartbeat, then rose again. He stepped in close, nose inches from the man's shoulder, inhaling the whole rotten story at once. They brought him up the ladder one careful rung at a time, hands on his arms, K-9s crowding the path without needing a leash. When his head broke the plane of the living room floor, the air felt different, brighter, bigger, but no safer. Outside, the dogs on the driveway reacted before they saw him. Their bodies tightened, a murmur of growls circling Maddie, like a storm pressing at the edge of a field. When the man finally stepped out onto the porch, blinking at the light, the full line of Unit 17 faced him. 10 dogs on the driveway, 4 at his back, every chest lifted, every tail set, every memory of old commands overruled by something deeper. For a long moment, the house, the street, the fog, all fell away. There was only the man who had lived under the boards, and the dogs who had come to drag his darkness into the open air. For a moment, the porch felt like a stage lit by nothing but gray daylight and fear. The man from under the house sat on the top step, wrists cuffed in front of him, breathing a little too slowly, as if he enjoyed the eyes on him. Below, Unit 17 lined the driveway, 14 German shepherds shoulder to shoulder, their attention pinned to him like nails. Ranger stood at the center of that line, scarred muzzle lifted, chest forward. He didn't bark. He didn't need to. His stare followed every small twitch of the man's fingers, every turn of his head. The other dogs fed off him, muscles coiled, waiting. They knew the scent now, the same one that stained the dirt below, sour with sweat and old anger. Morales crouched on the step opposite the man, keeping a measured distance. "Name," he said. No preamble, no small talk. The man licked his cracked lips, eyes sliding, passed the sergeant to the dogs. "You don't remember me?" he said softly. "They do?" Then, after a beat, "Elliot Crane. You used to call me Handler." The word landed heavier with the dogs than with the people. A ripple went through the line. Two of the older males bristled, ears flattening, as if some buried command had been dragged into the open. Ranger's pupils tightened. He took one step forward, nails clicking on concrete, then stopped himself, jaw working around a growl that never quite escaped. "Crane," Morales repeated, "you worked K-9. Elliot gave a small, mocking bow of his head. "Worked?" he said. "Past tense. Your hero Harper saw to that." His gaze drifted to the photo still clutched against Jenna's vest, then dropped to Maddie. "He took my unit, took my dogs, took my future. Funny how they came back to me anyway." Ranger's body said otherwise. At the sound of Ryan Harper's name, his tail stiffened, not in challenge, but in something closer to grief, sharpened into purpose. He shifted sideways, placing himself more squarely between Elliot and the small figure in the purple hoodie. The rest of Unit 17 mirrored him, tightening the living wall without a word spoken. Jenna's voice was steady, but her hand tightened on the notebook from the crawlspace. "You were using them off the books," she said, more statement than question. "Harper reported you." Elliot's smile thinned. "I expanded their mission," he replied. "He called it abuse. Command called it grounds for dismissal. He took my badge. He took them." His eyes flared. "I promised I'd take something back." Behind Morales, Maddie stood just inside the circle of fur, her hands clasped under her chin. "You knew my dad," she whispered, barely louder than the fog. Elliot heard it anyway, his head tilted, studying her as if she were part of some old case file. "I knew him," he said. "He swore these dogs would die for his family. I just had to wait and see who showed up first." The words slid over the crowd like ice water. Cole swore under his breath. Emily reached for Maddie, fingers brushing empty air, stopped again by a quiet shift of 2 K-9s who would not let anyone break their formation. Ranger's stare hardened, moving between the man he had once taken orders from and the child he had come here to protect. Carla broke the silence with a rough exhale. "We're done listening to this," she snapped. "Get him in the car. The rest can happen downtown." 2 officers moved to haul Elliot to his feet. The dogs watched every motion, bodies leaning just a little as the man stood, chains clinking softly. He rolled his shoulders, testing the cuffs, then let his gaze find Maddie one more time. From where she stood, the world narrowed. She saw his eyes, hollow but bright, and the small, mean curl of his mouth. "He said you'd be strong," Elliot murmured, voice turning almost fond. "Said the dogs would—" "No, they came. Now all that's left is to see who they choose." The line of K-9s answered with a low collective growl that vibrated in the air like distant thunder. The officers started him toward the SUV, one on each arm. For a few steps he moved docilely, head bowed. Then, in one sudden, vicious twist, he yanked his right arm free, driving a shoulder into the closer officer and breaking the grip on his other wrist. The shove sent both men stumbling, and Elliot exploded forward, cuffs flashing as he lunged straight for the gap in the circle where Maddie stood. For a heartbeat, it felt like the world moved too slowly. Emily screamed her name. Morales grabbed for his holster, fingers slipping. The nearest neighbors jerked back, uselessly reaching into empty air. Maddie's legs forgot how to work. All she could see were boots pounding the driveway, a thin face rushing closer, and metal glinting where his hands swung in front of him. The dogs did not move slowly. Ranger launched first, his whole body coiling and releasing in one fluid motion. 4 others followed him in the same breath, paws tearing at the concrete, vests snapping tight against their ribs. They met Elliot mid-stride, a wall of muscle and fur slamming into his chest and hips, knocking his feet out from under him before his fingers could brush Maddie's sleeve. They didn't go for his throat. They knew the line. Ranger hit high, teeth closing on the fabric and cuff chain across Elliot's forearms, pinning his hands to his chest. Another dog clamped onto his belt, anchoring his hips. 2 more planted their paws on his shoulders, weight driving him flat. A 5th hovered at his neck, teeth bared inches from skin, growling a promise of what would happen if he kept fighting. The driveway became a tangle of limbs and leashes that didn't exist, officers shouting, neighbors gasping, the drone above capturing every second. Morales was there in an instant, hand on Ranger's vest, shouting, "Hold! Hold!" But the command barely mattered. Ranger was already holding the man's arms, holding the line, holding back the part of himself that remembered a different kind of fight. Elliot thrashed once more, then went still when the dog at his throat snapped the air close enough to sting. The growl from Unit 17 rolled over him in one long, unbroken sound, not wild, not out of control, but ancient. It was the voice of animals who had spent their lives in service, refusing to let the past swallow one more child before their watch was done. When the officers wrestled fresh cuffs onto him and dragged him toward the SUV for real, Ranger and the others didn't chase. They stepped back just far enough to clear the way, then flowed into place between Maddie and the path the man would take. 14 dogs, chests heaving, eyes burning, watched him go as if daring him to try one more step in the wrong direction. The squad car door slammed shut with a heavy, final thud. The engine started, tires crunching over the gravel as the vehicle began to roll away. Only when the cruiser turned out of the cul-de-sac did Ranger let his head drop a fraction and exhale a long breath through his nose. He glanced back at Maddie just once, as if to check she was still there, still upright, still his to guard. Maddie met his gaze, tears drying on her cheeks, one hand pressed over her racing heart. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. She simply took a small, shaky step closer to the ring of fur and nylon that had become her shield. Ranger lifted his head and squared his shoulders again. The threat had been hauled away in steel and glass, but his job wasn't finished. Not yet. Not while the house still smelled like the man who had lived beneath it. The cruiser carrying Elliot Crane vanished down the road, swallowed by fog and pine trees, leaving behind a silence that felt strangely fragile. The neighbors hovered in small clusters, unsure whether to speak or simply watch. In the center of the driveway, Maddie stood with her arms wrapped around herself, as if afraid the quiet might shatter if she moved too suddenly. Unit 17 didn't move at first. 14 German shepherds held their line long after the car disappeared, every head still angled in the direction it had gone. Their bodies were tense but steady, as though some instinct told them danger didn't end just because metal doors had slammed shut. Ranger was the first to break the stillness, lowering his head and letting out a slow breath that misted in the morning air. Emily finally left the porch, walking carefully through the space the dogs left open for her. She knelt beside Maddie, hands hovering before she dared touch her. When Maddie leaned into her, burying her face in her aunt's jacket, Emily let out a shaky exhale, half relief, half apology. She whispered something only the girl could hear, but Ranger listened anyway, his tail giving a short, thoughtful sweep. Morales approached with a tired weight in his steps. He kept a respectful distance from the dogs, acknowledging the strange territory he was standing on. "We'll process the crawl space," he said quietly to Emily. "You won't be staying here tonight." His voice softened. "We'll make sure he can't come back." Ranger's ear twitched at the word he, but he didn't lift his head. The threat had been named. That was enough. Jenna crouched by Ranger, palm open, letting the old K-9 choose the moment. After a few breaths, he stepped forward, placing the bridge of his nose against her hand. The gesture was small, solemn, almost ceremonial. "Good boy," she whispered. "You did exactly what Harper trained you to do." Ranger blinked, the scar across his muzzle catching the thin light like a worn metal. Cole came closer, his limp more pronounced after the long morning. "They're not going anywhere fast," he murmured to Morales. "These dogs have made their call." Morales didn't argue. He had eyes. He could see loyalty carved into every line of Unit 17's formation, not wild protectiveness, but something deliberate, something inherited, something finished and unfinished all at once. As the tension thinned, the K-9s shifted into a looser circle, though none strayed far from Maddie. She stepped away from Emily, wiping her cheeks with her sleeve. Her gaze drifted to the porch, to the spot where Ranger had stood for hours, frozen between instinct and memory. She moved toward him, slowly, as if walking into a church pew. Ranger lowered his head so she didn't have to reach so high. From her pocket, Maddie pulled out the small, worn K-9 tag she'd carried since her father's funeral. She held it in her palm like a pebble from a riverbed. "This was his," she said quietly. "I kept it close because I didn't want to forget how brave he was." Ranger touched his nose to the metal, breathing in the scent of a man who no longer lived, yet somehow still commanded this moment. A soft rustle passed through the other dogs. One by one, they lowered themselves to their front paws, heads dipping in a posture that wasn't obedience, wasn't even submission. It was a salute. 14 chests pressed to the cold driveway, 14 tails still, 14 pairs of eyes fixed on the girl holding the badge of their last true handler. Neighbors watched with hands covering trembling mouths. Even Carla, who had been ready to sedate every dog in sight an hour earlier, stepped back with tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. There was no aggression in this bow, no fear, no confusion, only recognition, only allegiance. Maddie sank to her knees beside Ranger, the badge pressed to her chest. "Dad said you'd always know where home is," she whispered. The words cracked halfway through, but Ranger understood the parts she couldn't finish. He pressed his forehead into her shoulder, a motion gentle enough to break something inside the onlookers without frightening the child in front of him. The afternoon sun finally fought through the thinning fog, laying a soft golden wash over the roofs and driveways. Morales signaled to his officers to begin clearing the area, but he didn't rush the moment. He let it breathe, let it settle, let the world witness the quiet ending that had been stolen from these dogs years ago. As people drifted back to their homes and the last police SUV rolled away, Unit 17 remained where they were, spread across the yard, the driveway, and the base of the porch, as though rearranging themselves into a new map of protection. Ranger settled at the foot of the steps, choosing his place not by command, but by instinct. That evening, as lanterns clicked on inside the Harper house and the wind picked up along the bay, Maddie peeked out through the screen door. Ranger lay exactly where she'd left him, eyes half closed, but alert. A few feet away, 2 of the older dogs rested shoulder to shoulder. The others patrolled lazily, their shadows stretching long across the gravel. Maddie stepped onto the porch, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Ranger lifted his head. She didn't speak this time. She didn't need to. She just sat on the top step, letting the warmth of the house settle behind her and the steady presence of 14 silent guardians settle around her. Clearwater Bay would sleep easier that night, not because the threat was gone, but because the darkness had been named and met with teeth and courage and memory. And under the soft glow of the porch light, Unit 17 stayed where they believed they belonged, between a little girl and the long shadow of a man who thought he could take something that wasn't his. For the first time in years, Maddie felt safe enough to breathe deeply. Ranger watched her chest rise and fall, then let his own breath ease out, slow and certain, like a promise made by those who never break them. If this story kept you watching, drop a quick comment to support the channel. Even something as simple as a 0 or 1 helps more than you think. And if you don't want to miss the next shocking K-9 story, hit subscribe and stay with us. More powerful, true-to-the-heart tales are coming soon.